Muy buenas tardes, siendo las 17 horas puntualmente el día de hoy, viernes 26 de febrero del 2021, le saluda al profesor Cristian Cristóful, coordinador del Departamento de Inglés del Instituto Superior de Lenguas. Se da inicio a la defensa virtual de Tesina acorde a la resolución número 141/2021 que fija fecha y hora de la tesina con el título Análisis of Dubbing from English to Spanish of the World of Warcraft Instance Icecrown Citadel, a cargo de la autora Gladys Giuliana Irala Paredes, de la carrera de lengua inglesa del Instituto Superior de Lenguas. El día de hoy, viernes 26 de febrero, nos acompaña la directora de la institución, la doctora Valentina Canese, en calidad de presidente del Tribunal Examinador. Muy buenas tardes, profesora.
Buenas tardes, profesor.
En calidad de miembros del Tribunal Examinador, las profesoras Sharon Weaver y María Antonia Ocampos. Muy buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes, profesor.
Bienvenidas.
Gracias.
La postulante universitaria Giuliana Irala. Buenas tardes, Giuliana.
Muy buenas tardes.
Entonces, le damos lugar a la presidente de mesa, la doctora Valentina Canese, para que desarrolle la defensa, el manejo del desarrollo de la defensa.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Giuliana. You have 30 minutes to present your thesis to us, and we wish you the best, and we'll be ready to ask you questions at the end.
Okay, I'm gonna start sharing my screen then.
Please turn your microphone off. Only Giuliana can start now.
I don't know if you can see it. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. I'm gonna try it again. Because it was working before.
Yes, it was working, so it will work. Don't worry. There it is. You're presenting now in a minute. Now we can see it.
Okay. It's loading. Okay, there it goes. Okay, well, thank you everyone for being here and welcome to my presentation. And today I'm going to talk to you, I'm going to present to you a bit about what I researched about the dubbing from a specific part of a game, which is World of Warcraft. And the part in the game, the zone is the Icecrown Citadel. The title of my tesina was Analysis of the Dubbing from English to Spanish of the World of Warcraft instance Icecrown Citadel. So translation is probably the best way to solve communication problems. Nowadays, not only books are being translated, but also TV shows, video games, websites, and some of these, they require not only a translation process, but also a localization of the product. And this field, the localization field, is a new field well, maybe not so new in the industry, but it's been growing more and more over the past decades, and it's still expanding. Games, specifically, because they are the subject of this investigation, they need to be adapted to different markets and languages. In games, they have all sort of elements. In a game, we can find software, we can find literary elements, theatrical elements, audiovisual elements, and they can all be found in one single product. So there isn't just one possible translation because games are also interactive. So the player has an impact in the outcome of the game. So it's not like other types of translation. For my testina, I analyzed an instance of the World of Warcraft universe, which is just a zone. And this game has been translated so far into 7 languages, which are German, French, Spanish, Russian, Korean, traditional Chinese, and simplified Chinese. World of Warcraft is most commonly known as WoW, and is a very popular game. It's been out for 16 years now, and several thousands of people interact in this game every day. So I believe it can be affirmed that the game chosen for this investigation and has a special relevance and connection with those who play it. It is a game that has been localized to various cultures and languages, and it can contribute a considerable amount of information to the field of translation studies. Before we get to the statement of the problem and the objectives, I want to show you a picture. And you are now before one of the very first translations ever made of a game. It was not made by a professional translator, but it was made by the Japanese developers of that game, and the game was Zero Wing. So it became a meme a few years ago when it was sort of rediscovered, but it also helped developers realize about the importance of hiring real translators for that job. Okay, so the statement of the problem. Video games are made of a series of elements. Like I already said before, they are all of different nature, and they all need to be translated. The combination of all the translation of all these elements should make the players from different markets feel like they are playing the original game, and it should fulfill their expectations. And I can tell you that gamers' expectations are really high. As with any type of translation, there are, of course, implications to consider. Translation gain, loss, the techniques that are being applied. And it is very important to say that the techniques applied in the process have a huge impact on the final product. So the look and feel of the original should and must be preserved. And that is the task of the translator, and it's really not an easy one. The purpose of the study, the main objective of the study was to examine the dubbing of the World of Warcraft instance, Icecrown Citadel, from the Alliance perspective, in order to identify the implications in the video game localization. The script has a few changes depending on the faction of the player. And the specific objectives were to identify translation techniques used for the dubbing of the instance, to examine losses and gains in the process of localization of the Icecrown Citadel, and to present suggestions for improvements of the dubbing of the instance if possible. The significance. Video game translation is a part of the audiovisual translation field, and like I mentioned at the beginning, it has been expanding in recent years, and there is a lot to research about it. WoW is set in a fictional world, the fictional world of Azeroth, and the Icecrown Citadel, which is the instance that it has been analyzed, takes players through different challenges. It contains cinematographic features that describe each situation, and it has many dialogues to get players into context, so we can find a lot of translation material. This study was expected to provide a broader perspective of translation elements that can enrich the field and give new tools to future translators. I'm not going to talk about the whole literature review, but I am going to mention a few points that are maybe the most important. I talked about video games in the review. I also define diegetic and non-diegetic elements, and diegetic elements are every element that's narrative and that it's inside the game. So if you find a dialogue in a game, that's a diegetic element. You find the explanation of a quest, that's also a diegetic element. Everything that's inside the universe of the game. And a non-diegetic element, is everything you can find on the menu, on the configurations and stuff. World of Warcraft, as I said, it develops in the fantasy world of Azeroth, and it has an extensive background story, and it is an online role-playing game. So that means that the gamers, they create their own character, they customize their names, they customize their characters, and they can follow a storyline through quests and play against other players or even face bosses in instances like the Icecrown Citadel. Localization. Localization is simply the process, well, not simply because I think it's a really hard process, but it's the process of modification of a product in order for it to be launched into a different market. Um, if you are if you're a translator, sorry, working in this, you should have a previous knowledge of the game and a previous knowledge of the community that plays the game and the place that you are preparing the game for. Video game localization, and it's important that the translator working in this task becomes familiar with the game. And there are also many translation techniques. I mentioned more than a few in my Decina, and I'm gonna tell them to you right now. And the first one is borrowing. Borrowing is just borrowing an expression from another language. You can borrow it without changing the form, without changing the meaning. You can also borrow it changing the form but not the meaning, and sometimes it can be blended too. So you can change, you take one part native and one part borrowed. Transcreation is the second technique, and it's about creating new names from scratch. This one gives a lot of freedom to the translator to do as they please. Some examples are Wild Wind, actually. I wrote Crazy Wind there because Wild Wind was translated as Alerón Chiflado. And Alerón Chiflado would actually be a crazy wind. And that's a translation that was found in a video game. And another example is the Dolphin Dasher that was translated as Velocidelfín. Then we have Calc, and this is just a literal translation. Some examples are Chaos Eater, that was translated as Devora Caos, and Crossblade, that was translated as Hoja Cruzada. Then we have oblique, and inside of oblique, there are several different techniques. One of them is transposition. Transposition. And transposition is when the word order shifts without changing the meaning in a sentence. Or sometimes it can be when you change a sentence to go from plural to singular or vice versa. I don't know what you do in that, sorry. Okay. Then we have modulation, and modulation can be found when the use of a specific expression in the target language is more appropriate than the literal translation of the words. So an example is te lo dejo in Spanish would literally translate to I leave it to you, but it's more correct to say you can have it. Then we have equivalence or idiomatic translation. And equivalence is used when you have idioms, proverbs, names of institutions, and it's mostly applied in those cases. And the last one is adaptation. The last one inside of Blake is adaptation, and it's all about cultural references and how to adapt them to a new market, a new culture. Amplification versus economy is not inside of Blake anymore, but this was another technique, and is about adding the linguistic elements or synthesizing linguistic elements. Generalization versus particularization is another technique, and I found this very good example of the dialogue that Jesus and Peter have in the Bible. When Jesus asked him, do you love me, Peter? And he does it 3 times. And the first 2 times he asks the question, the word he uses in the Koine Greek is agapan and agapam. And agapan means a love that surrenders. But the 3rd time he asks, and when he asks the question, do you love me? He's using a totally different verb, which is philein. And philein is an affection between friends. So is considered to be just a feeling, an emotion, something that does not surrender at all, like agapam. So I think this is a very good example of generalization and particularization, because the Reina Valera 1960 translators, they use the same verb all 3 times to translate words that are profoundly different. Then we have discursive creation, and the last one is variation, which is about changes of textual tone, style, dialect, and accent. Moving on to the translation loss and gain. We have a gain in translation when new terms arise, when the translation helps the product fit the audience perceptions, and loss occurs when ideas cannot be transmitted. So there's like a deletion of information. Audiovisual translation was also a topic I talked about in the Tessina, and I mentioned some history. And then we had dubbing, which is when the source text has to be adapted completely by the translator, and it's a complete change of the soundtrack of the game. Then I mentioned some challenges in video game translation, and I'm gonna tell you a few of them right now. And the first challenge for a translator working in a translation or localization of a video game is to recognize the type of the game, because there are games that allow you to be more creative, and there are other games that need to have more research, because there are games based, for example, in wars or in histories of king and stuff. So you cannot use a lot of creativity there, and you have to do more research than creativity. The second challenge is to get acquainted with the universe of the game. You need to know the history behind the game. And World of Warcraft specifically, it has an amazing history behind it, and because it's like a completely different world, like a virtual world, and there's a lot to know about the game before even attempting to translate it. Translators also need to know at least how to play the game, or to understand how to play the game. And they need to know about the limitations in the amount of text, because they cannot put more text than the original. Because if they do that, they are not. It wouldn't be accepted, because they also need to follow like the rules of the software and the program and stuff. Another challenge is always to translate humor and word puns. And the last topic was the computer-assisted translation, which is just a tool to help translators in the task of translating a video game. But in the end, it all depends on the human translator skills. Like the final product will depend on that. The methods. The type of study is a qualitative type of study focused in the analysis of the dubbing of a specific instance of the World of Warcraft universe. Like I said, the instance is not the whole game, because the game is huge. The instance is just a tiny zone of the game. Both English and Spanish versions were compared, and implications and suggestions were for improvement, of the dubbing were stated when possible. The data was collected through transcriptions, note-taking, and screen captures, and the analysis was all the data was identified, organized, and into coherent categories in a table like the one you can see on the screen. Ethical concerns. My research was limited to the analysis of the English to Spanish dubbing of the Icecrown Citadel. Background, there was a bit of background for means of context only, and the quality of the dubbing was not analyzed. No, neither the dramatization or the interpretation of the dubbing actors, but only the translation of the dialogue used for the dubbing of the instance. That's all I analyzed. And now we are getting to the results. So the type of audiovisual translation that I identified in the game was dubbing. All elements analyzed were diegetic elements. They were narrative elements, part of dialogues in the game. And the techniques used, borrowing was mostly found in names and titles. For example, Tyrion, Arthas, Muradin, Lanatel, Varian Rain, those are names of characters that appear in the Icecrown Citadel. They were just borrowed. Terenas Menethil, that's also another name. And then Lord and Lady, those weren't translated as well. And I could also find borrowing in this special language because I said before that depending on the faction you choose when you create your character, you cannot understand what the other faction is saying because you're like enemies. So there was a part of the Icecrown Citadel when you could hear someone who is not from your faction talk, and that part of the translation was not. That part of the dialogue was not translated because it's a special language. Then we had then I found transcreation, and I found it in a few names like Fordring. It was translated to Vadin, which is totally different. Then Marogar was translated into Tuétano. Calc was found in almost every table. For example, Free at Last was translated into Libre al fin, and By the Might of the Lich King translated into Por el poder del rey exánime. This was probably the most common one. It was all over. Then we had Oblique. In transposition, I put an example here. They will fall as the light of righteousness envelops them, into caerá en cuanto la luz de la rectitud los envuelva. And this is a transposition because it went from referring to a group of people to just one people. It went from plural to singular. Then it was modulation. And I put in an example there, but I have another one here that I want to tell you that it's also in my Decina. That was Naxanar was merely a setback. With the power of the war, Valenar will have his vengeance. And the translation was Naxanar fue un pequeño revés. Con el poder de la esfera, Valenar conseguirá su venganza. And I use this as modulation. I put this as modulation. Like I think is a very good example. Then we had equivalence. And an example is you learn of that firsthand into Lo sabrás en carne propia. Adaptation was not found between among the dialogues. I think there it goes. Amplification and economy. Sorry. The examples would be, I would not want the life's greatest champion to miss seeing this wretched world remade in my image. And it was translated into no quiero que el mejor campeón de la luz pierda cómo quedará este maldito mundo rehecho a mi imagen y semejanza. I put that as an amplification example because of my image and a mi imagen y semejanza. You brought an example of economy was you brought my reinforcements with you into me has traído refuerzos. This example of economy, it is shorter, but it also had an implication of loss of details because according to the context in which it was said, I consider that it to be a loss of details to make it so much shorter than that. Then generalization and particularization, they were not found. Discursive creation was not found either. And variation was all over one of the characters of the Icecrown Citadel, whose name is Muradin, and it was all over his table. And I'm not gonna read the original dialogue in English, but the translation sounds way more sophisticated than how the boss actually sounds like in the game. So I consider that to be a big loss too of details, and it's also an example of variation. It was translated into no sé quién te crees que eres, amigo, pero tengo un asunto pendiente con Artas y no te vas a poner en mi camino. That was a translation. Then there were also losses, there were gains found, and there were two types of loss. The first one is the loss of details, And I put this as an example. The enemy will falter at the sight of you into el enemigo vacilará al verlos. Y the breaking of this one has been taxing into el adiestramiento ha sido agotador. This last one is a very good example of loss if you also know the context of the game. Because I clarified this in my Tessina, and I said that Arthas, the Lich King, is talking about a prisoner. He took a prisoner. And for him, it was really hard to have this prisoner like follow him, to join like his dark side, sort of. But the translation makes it seem like it was an easy job, El adiestramiento ha sido agotador, but I did it, like, and it takes away the whole feeling of the game, because the whole point of the Icecrown Citadel is that this guy didn't actually fall into his dark side, to say. Then we have the loss of emphasis, and there was only one, and it was cowardly dogs, that was translated into cobardes. In the source text, the hate the character has towards the horde is emphasized, but this was lost in the translation. And since it's a game and many small like children play it too, like the worst offense you can find in the game is dogs. So not translating that in the dialogue, to me, was a big loss of emphasis. Then there were also games, and one of them was Could It Be Lord Fordring into Será Posible Lord Vadin, and I consider this to be an addition of emphasis because it made it clear for Spanish speakers that the character was in a state of surprise. And the tables were filled with expressions that are natural for Spanish speakers, and I found it in numerous opportunities. And some examples are like Fire Up the Engines was translated into Enciendan los Motores, or I see I must take matters into my own hands was translated into Veo que debo hacer esto yo misma. The game was localized to the Latin American audience, so it was using a neutral accent. There were implications as well, and one of them is the loss of details. And to me, the biggest loss of details was the accent, Muradin's accent, because it's a very important part of the history of the race that Muradin belongs to. So that was a big loss of detail. And also another example was you brought my reinforcements with you, but the translation went for me has traído refuerzos. And this was also very important because the boss that says this, whose name is Svalna, she can bring characters from dead, like back from dead, and have them fight beside her. So I think there was a big loss of details there. Somebody could get confused by it. And my conclusions are that some techniques are more common than others. Loss and gain are also present in video game translation, as in any type of translation. And I made suggestions when they were possible to make. I was actually very happy that I could make some suggestions. Implications were related to loss of details, mostly. Probably the translators, they did not take into account like the small confusion that could be generated by not being precise in the translation, because gamers, like, they really pay attention to the small details. Loss of details and loss of emphasis were more common. Gains were related to the use of expressions that are common and natural sounding to Spanish speakers. And I believe that more research can be done in this area using the same game even, or other games. My personal suggestion would be to investigate the cultural references in the game, because there are tons of that. And I think there also, am for sure that there may be other aspects of the game suitable for analysis, but unfortunately they were not the objective of the present study. So that's it for my presentation, and I shall give the floor now to Professor Canese.
Well, thank you, Giuliana, for a very clear presentation. I now will give the floor to Professor Maria Antonia Ocampos to see if you have any questions for Giuliana. Your micro,
there you are. Yes, Giuliana. I really have a couple of questions. The first question I have is, which was the main problem you found to translate this, I would say, this game or these dialogues in the game? Because I know that you use a lot of techniques in order to find from your point of view, the most correct, let's say, terms, in order not to lose the idea and the intention of the author, let's say.
Okay, so I didn't actually translate the dialogues because I use the dialogues that were already translated. Mm-hmm. But in my personal opinion, if I were to translate this game, and if I didn't know about the game, because I've been playing the game for like 12 years or so, for a translator that does not know about the game, that would be like the biggest challenge, to not know the story of the game, the story behind it. Because World of Warcraft has like a big amount of fans that are very into the history of the game. And if you make a tiny little, if you messed up like just a bit, they will completely notice that. And I didn't put this in my Tecina, but I actually wanted to make questions like to random players and ask them about the Icecrown Citadel translation, because I know for sure that they hate it, and they hate it because they see all these little details like the accent. They hate that the accent is not there, or they hate that Fordring was translated to Vadin because they don't get it. I mean, why? So that to me is the greatest challenge, to not know the story and to maybe not know how the community will react to it.
Okay. Sharon, do you have a question? I have another one, but go first, you, if you can.
Oh, go ahead, Maria Antonia, with all your questions, and then we'll move on to the next one.
Okay. I wanted to know if in some cases you invent the names of the characters. And if so, yes. And if so, I really don't know about the game. So I'm asking, therefore, I just read your Tecina, okay? In that case, what was your decision to choose one or other name, taking account of what?
No, I didn't actually invent any of the names. Those are the real names. And okay. If anyone goes into the game, they will see the horrible translations, because when I used to play a lot that game, I used to like have fights in the chat with them. This translation is horrible, they said, and I was like, no, because you don't get it, you don't know everything that's behind it. But no, I did not invent anything of that. I wish I would have invented that, because I believe it's a great translation, and there are some things that can be improved, and I suggested them in my Tecina. But no, I did not invent it.
Okay, and I have the last question. I see that you have a lot of losses, or remember that we studied that translation loss of everything from Spanish into English, English into Spanish. Sometimes you gain, sometimes you lose. How you handle that? Because you have a lot of modifications there and you name it them as losses, right?
Yeah, I named them as losses.
Okay.
And I don't really understand the question, like how do I handle the losses that I
The
found?
losses, yes, because you use a lot of losses.
Uh-huh.
I mean, they change it that you made into Spanish, from English into Spanish. You create a lot of new phrases, new words that sometimes you gain words and sometimes you lose words, right?
Yeah.
Okay. How do you handle that? You create it by your own, you follow a rule or something, because you have a lot of techniques there in translation, a lot, really. You use, I think, the whole span of translation techniques, right?
Yeah.
So how you handle to choose, I will use now this, I will use that, etc. Just an
Yeah.
idea.
When I was suggesting improvements for the dialogues, I didn't really think about I'm gonna use this one or this one, because I try to like guide myself with the knowledge I already have of the game. And being a gamer, like a player of that game, I was like, how would I like this to be more clear for the community? Like I was thinking about the community the whole time. Like the reality is that the community, the World of Warcraft community, is not actually gonna read my Tessina. But if I was thinking, like, if they were to read this, would they like more my suggestions than the dialogue that the game made? So it was not really about the techniques when I suggested improvements, but once I was done, I was like, hey, I use this, or I use this other technique, but that wasn't my main focus, to be honest.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I finish.
Okay, Professor Weaver, now I give the floor to you for your questions.
Thank you. Well, I had printed out my notes from back in December, which I had sent to Giuliana. Giuliana, of the questions, the points that I put in these notes, was there anything that you felt that you had to prepare yourself for in order to respond if I were to ask you to explain that?
I
Because
actually researched a bit about edutainment, and I added that to my Tessina too. You can see it there, but that I think that was the only one that I find it like I need to investigate about it.
and entertainment. Could you tell us again, just to refresh us, what is edutainment, which is a new word, which I learned that word actually through your thesis. I had never seen that before.
Those are games that are used for educational purposes, and so a few of the articles that I read said that you could practically use every game for educational purposes, but I don't really think you could use World of Warcraft for that, because World of Warcraft is a very addictive game, and that wouldn't be educational at all.
Talking about addiction, let me ask you, I mean, this is not an addiction, but do you have a favorite character? I mean, you say that World of Warcraft has been out for 16 years and that you first got involved with the game 12 years ago. Over time, have you changed your main character, or have that you choose to play with, as your representative or whatever, your avatar, or do you find that in different moments you play different roles? To give us a little bit of insight about the gamer perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I tried different characters, because when you create your character and you customize it, you can also choose if whether you're going to be like a warrior or a hunter and stuff. So I've tried different classes, like hunter, warrior, and priest, and others. But then I always came back to the one that I started with, which is the hunter. And yeah, World of Warcraft gamers, they usually go around playing every class, so they can just know how to play it, and and like tell you about it, you know, like when you're not doing it good, they will tell you that you're not doing it good because I've done it. So that's kind of the attitude of the World of Warcraft gamer.
They do try experimenting or playing the game in different roles, is what you're
Yes,
saying, the majority of the people.
the majority.
Oh, okay. And could you talk more about what this massively multiplayer online role-playing game is, this MMORPG?
Yeah, those are games like World of Warcraft where you log in and you have your own customized character, and you can role play in it because you could follow the storyline and the quest line of the character that you created, and that's called role playing. There are other people that take role playing a bit more far than that, and that's basically it. You have your own character, you can customize it, you can follow a storyline, you can fight against other players. And it's massively because as you are online, you connected to the game, there are also thousands and thousands of other gamers in it, and you can interact with them.
Okay. It kind of surprises me that with so many people playing, that the company is not sensitive to the concerns of certain communities that feel that the localization was, that there were losses, let's say, and that improvements could not be incorporated. There's no review board or some kind of mechanism where translators could present their suggestions for improvement, and that there might be a possibility that this would be implemented.
No, there's not a way to suggest improvements, and the community is very vocal about it, to be honest, because there are forums in the World of Warcraft website, and they talk about it. They don't really like the Spanish translation, and the best way for them to express their discontent with the translation is to not play with the Spanish version. They only use it in English.
I see. I see. Do you feel that it's true that many young people in Paraguay got interested in English primarily through games rather than, say,
Yes.
movies or songs? Or
Yes, I do. I think that's very that's true. I get interested in English. I mean, I already studied English in school, but then I started playing games, and it was all in English first. It was not translated yet back then. So I there were things I had to understand somehow, right? So I started looking for this the translations of those words and investigated
Mhm.
more. So yeah, that got me more interested.
Yes,
But it was in another time in my life where I actually discovered that I loved the English language.
wonderful. Tell me, Juliana, what are your career goals at this point? I mean, where do you see yourself being a year from now, for example? What do you think you will be doing?
I always said I wouldn't teach, but but right now I really feel like teaching. I miss a lot being in university, and I actually miss my teachers a lot. We always talk about that with my classmates. And I found out that I actually like teaching. So I would like to teach maybe in high school. I am now teaching in Kinder 3. And it's very interesting, and it's very funny too. But that's what I'm doing right now, and I'm gonna keep doing it maybe in higher levels of school or maybe university if that ever comes in my way.
So you think you might see yourself working more and more in teaching, actually,
In
not so
teaching,
much.
but I want to do translation. If I ever see that there is a job position in Blizzard, which is the World of Warcraft creator, I would definitely uh, try that. Like for sure, I'm gonna send them my Tessina and try it. Like I would like to do
Yes,
that.
for sure, for sure.
You
I
can you can be a very good translator. So just keep it being a teacher so we can rest in peace.
Let's see if there was any other thing I wanted to ask you.
Yes, Professor Weaver, one last question because we are about to finish the time for.
Well, perhaps there was something that I had seen, and I wondered if it's true or not. This idea that some concepts are impossible to. I mean, it says loss occurs because between some languages it is impossible to transmit the same idea. Some concepts generally belong to only one certain language, and they cite you cite the literature, Agustina, Norwitz, and Nukabe or something. And I just wanted to hear you talk a bit about that, because that, in a way, I feel like sometimes it seems impossible to translate, but I feel that there must be a way that everything could be translated or expressed, maybe not have the same impact, but that the idea should be able to be communicated in any language. And I just wondered what you thought about that.
Well, I actually think that it can be translated, but it's just not the same. Like I see it a lot in Guarani, for example.
Yes.
There are words that are used in Guarani all the time, and they have like so many significant, I don't know, it means so much, so many meanings. And I can think of a few, but they are not really good words, like nice words that I would repeat. But to me, is actually, I mean, you can translate it. You can try to say it in Spanish, for example, but it will never be the same because it does not have the same feeling to it. That's my personal opinion.
Okay. Bueno, do you need to make some questions, Professor? Otherwise, I have one final question, but it's a bit.
Actually, I do, but just go ahead, one last one, okay, Sharon, because I think you are like just usually it's 2 or 3 questions, but I think you're going 15 or something.
Therefore, I was short, so I just.
No, you were just right, Maria Antonia. So, Sharon, yeah.
Well, I'm embarrassed now, Dr. Canesi. I wondered what you thought about my suggestion that you do not use the numeral 3 or the numeral 4 in a sentence, but that you put a number word. I mean, this was like I had this drilled in me as from grade school. So it distracted me to see that you did change that in your final copy, I'm assuming.
Yes, I changed it, and at the beginning it wasn't like upsetting to me, but then I read your notes and I was like, wow, I hate this. So I had to change it, but I didn't notice it until you said it. So now I'm gonna put everything in numeral words from now on, forever.
Okay. Bueno, if I will turn off my mic for a while and let someone else ask a question. Thank you, Judy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms.
Actually, thank you, Sharon, for being so thorough with the questions, first of all. I think that you touched on almost all of the things that I kind of had. I just have one question for Giuliana regarding translation gain and loss. Considering, well, you've implied it a little bit when you mentioned that most of players do not enjoy the Spanish version of the game. Would you say that the dubbing of the game has more loss than gain, or vice versa?
In my personal opinion, to me, I really think is an amazing translation. I was never one of the gamers that thought that I hated it, and I started appreciating it more when I started studying in the ISL, because I started learning a lot, taking into account the perception of the gamers. That's how I decided to to identify the losses and gains, right? But for my personal opinion, there aren't that many losses, to be honest. I would leave it like that. I am very proud of those translators. I mean, I couldn't have done it better, to be honest. But, well, maybe I could have. But to me, there are a lot of losses, to be honest.
Okay, and I just want to congratulate you on the good job and the thorough analysis that you did on the translation, and hopefully, maybe you can write to the game developers and send them, your thesis and see if they will take into account any of the suggestions that you have. One last thing regarding your suggested improvement. Did you, after the fact, I know that you didn't consider the strategies before the fact, but after the fact, did you take the time to take into account what type of translation strategy you used? And if so, which one did you find leaning on the most?
I didn't take like a specific amount of time to do that. I did recognize them, like, oh, I use this or that, but it wasn't like a thorough analysis of it. But I think that what I used the most was probably modulation, because I consider that some phrases were more appropriate for the Spanish audience, and that's what modulation is about.
Okay, so my suggestion would be, if you ever decide to improve on your thesis or maybe prepare an article for publication, you can add that layer of analysis to your because you have that nice chart that you did, and then for the suggested improvements, maybe you can explain the strategy that you use and how it compares to the one the original translators used, and why you consider that to be, maybe more appropriate than the one that the translators used. That's just something that would add on to the work, just as a suggestion for future research. Okay, so thank you, Giuliana, for a great presentation and a great defense of all the questions that we threw at you. Now we would like to ask you to leave us for a few minutes. We will deliberate and then we'll call you back. Mr. Christopher will call you back on the WhatsApp group.
Okay.
Hello, Giuliana, here. Well, I don't have a script to read to you like we do sometimes in other places, but considering all of the criteria taken into account by all of the evaluators, we've decided to give you the grade of 5. So from now on, we can call you Licenciada. Congratulations.
Yay!
Thank you.
What we want to ask you is if you can send us by email the last PDF version of your thesis, because some of us don't have it handy, so that we can just have that for the posterity. If you can send it to us right away after this, because Ms. Weaver and Ms. Ocampo, they needed to complete the form that we need to submit. It won't change your grade, but we would like to have your corrected PDF, okay?
Okay, would you like me to send it in the WhatsApp group? I mean, I think it would be...
Through
I
mail.
will-
Through mail.
Mail is better.
I need it in the mail so that I can open it. My phone does not have very much capacity.
Oh, okay, so I don't really have Miss Maria Antonia's mail.
Okay.
You just send it to Mr. Cristoforo and he will send it to us.
Excellent. Excellent.
Okay.
Okay,
you.
so we can have a last picture. We don't have bocaditos or drinks like we usually do for in-person.
Yeah, exactly.
So we will have a virtual celebration of sorts.
Yeah, just to toast us water.
Yeah, and tereré and popcorn that I have. So okay, so congratulations, and we wish you the best. And if you need anything, you know where to find us.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm so happy. Thank you.
Are your parents there?
Yes, they are in the other room. I'm gonna
Do you
go
want to
help.
call them in so we can felicitarle?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
scream to them, 5, I got a 5. You can-
I don't think my mom will want to come because she's wearing a camisón. And she wouldn't want my teachers to see her with her camisón. So
Okay, anyways, congratulate them.
I will
Yes.
tell them.
Well, congratulations. And please tell your classmates to finish their thesis so we can have more graduates.
I
Okay?
will tell them. I will.
Okay? So one more time. Congratulations. Oh, we have to stop the recording, Mr. Cristobal.
Yes, I need to give a closure in Spanish, so
Okay.
bear with
Okay.
me, please. Bueno, esto ha sido todo. Muchas gracias a la flamante licenciada Giuliana Irala por una hermosa disertación, a las profesoras que estuvieron evaluando esa disertación. Hasta luego.
Hasta luego.
Adiós.
Okay, let me stop it.